She sits with her arms crossed, leans back in the chair, and rocks slowly, back and forth. When the judge speaks, she does not look at him. She looks to the side, down at the table, up at the ceiling. When the interpreter begins to translate, she interrupts and says that she already knows, that she does not need to hear, that they can stop. The prosecutor asks a simple question. She does not answer. Instead, she says that she is thirsty, that she wants something to eat, that she does not feel well. When she is given water, she takes a sip, puts the glass down, and begins to talk about something completely different. When the psychiatrist describes her delusions, she shakes her head and smiles, as if it were about someone else. When the victim's name is mentioned, she remains in the same position. No reaction, no change. She looks down at her hands and begins picking at her nails. Lola Daviet is 12 years old and lives with her family in an apartment building on Rue Manan, in the 19th arrondissement of Paris. The area is located right next to Parc des Buttes-Chaumont, a densely built neighborhood with schools, small shops, and residential buildings, where many families have lived for generations. The building is a classic Parisian apartment house, with an inner courtyard, stairwells, and basement storage areas shared by the residents. Lola attends College Georges Brassens, a few blocks away. She walks to and from school, the same route every day. It is an area she knows, a neighborhood she moves through without company, a home she returns to by routine. Nothing in her daily life deviates from the ordinary. On Friday, October 14, 2022, Lola finishes school in the afternoon. She leaves the school grounds together with other students and heads in the direction of home. It is daylight, people are moving through the area, traffic is heavy. There is nothing that stands out in her behavior, nothing that suggests she is worried or stressed. She is on her way home, as she always is. Surveillance cameras at the entrance of the apartment building capture her when she arrives. She is not alone. An adult woman enters with her. The woman is not someone the family knows. She is not a neighbor, not a friend, not a relative. She is not part of the family's circle. They are seen entering through the gate, past the intercom into the stairwell. This is the last confirmed sighting of Lola alive. When she does not come up to the apartment, the family reacts quickly. This is not normal. Lola usually comes home immediately. She usually checks in. She does not usually stay out. The parents begin searching the building. They go down into the stairwell, look in the basement storage areas, in the garbage room, in the corridors that run beneath the building. They call out, they search, they go through the common areas. At the same time, the police are contacted. A search operation is launched in the building. The stairwells are searched. The basement is searched. The garbage areas are checked. No trace of Lola is found. There is nothing to suggest that she has left the building again. The surveillance footage shows only what is already known. She went in. She never came out. During the evening, the search continues in and around the property. Police interview residents, check entrances, secure camera footage. Nothing points to an accident. Nothing suggests that she got lost. Nothing suggests that she left the area voluntarily. The search continues in the building during the evening. Police move systematically through the common areas, check basement storage units, corridors, technical rooms, and the garbage room. It is an old building with several levels below ground, storage units belonging to different apartments and areas that are not used daily by the residents. At the same time, the police review surveillance footage from the area around the building. They see the unknown woman leave the building later that afternoon. She is carrying the same plastic container that is later found in the garbage room. She moves openly. No one tries to stop her. No one reacts. Cameras follow her through the neighborhood. She is seen in several places in the surrounding area. She stops. She puts the container down. She adjusts her grip. She continues. The police can now establish three things. Lola followed the woman into the building voluntarily. The crime took place inside the building. And the woman captured on camera is the person who carried the body out. The investigation enters a new phase. It is no longer about a disappearance. It is now about identifying the woman. When the police have secured the garbage room and sealed off the basement areas, the focus shifts entirely to the surveillance material. The images from the entrance are played over and over again. Lola is clearly seen entering the building together with the unknown woman. The woman moves confidently, without hesitation, as if she knows where she is going. Nothing in her behavior signals stress or urgency. More cameras in the area are collected. The police map movement patterns, timestamps, directions. They follow the woman backward in time and forward, from the moment she leaves the building. She is seen carrying the plastic container through the neighborhood, alone, without trying to hide it. She walks along sidewalks, crosses streets, stops. No one reacts. No one intervenes. At the same time, housing records and resident lists in the building are reviewed. Who lives there? Who has access? Who can move through the building without attracting attention? Quite quickly, it becomes clear that the woman is not registered at the address. She is not a tenant. She does not appear in the property register. However, there is a connection. One of the residents in the building has a sister who has recently been staying in Paris. The name matches. The age matches. The police obtain image material. It is the same person seen on the cameras. Now there is an identity. The police track the woman's latest movements through cameras in public transport. She has moved through the city, changed direction, continued. The trail leads west, toward Bois de Boulogne, a large park area where many people pass through, where individuals can disappear into the crowd. During the night, only hours after the discovery in the basement, she is located. She is arrested without resistance. She is alone. She is carrying no belongings that stand out. She does not resist. She says nothing of significance at the scene. She is taken in for questioning. In police custody, she is confronted with the images from the cameras, with the time, with the place, with the plastic container. She does not deny it. She does not try to explain it away. She gives answers that do not add up. She talks about herself, about her problems, about how she feels. She changes the subject. She deflects. Eventually, she says that she had the girl in her apartment. She says that she killed her. She says it without drama, without visible emotion, as if she were describing something ordinary. The investigators ask her to describe what happened. She does, but in fragments, in pieces, in no coherent order. She speaks about voices, about threats, about things that cannot be followed logically. She says that she was afraid. She says that she was angry. She says that she does not remember everything. The police pause, document, bring in the prosecutor. A forensic psychiatric assessment is requested immediately. It is already clear that this is not an ordinary confession. This is something else. After the confession, the forensic investigation begins. The autopsy is carried out the same weekend. The doctors document the injuries methodically, without interpretation, without assumptions. What emerges is a picture of repeated violence, both before and after death. Lola has been subjected to severe physical violence. There are signs of strangulation. There are signs of blunt force trauma. There are cut wounds inflicted after she was already dead. The forensic pathologists determine that the cause of death is asphyxia. She was suffocated. There are no signs that death occurred in the basement. The injuries and blood patterns show that the violence took place indoors, in a different environment. This confirms the police's early assessment. The body was moved. At the same time, the apartment where the woman had been staying is examined. Forensic technicians document surfaces, floors, furniture, textiles. They secure biological material. They secure objects. They secure clothing. Everything is sent for analysis. The timeline begins to take shape. The prosecutor releases the first formal information. It concerns the murder of a minor. It concerns torture and barbaric violence. It concerns unlawful imprisonment. The charges reflect the severity of what has been established. At the same time, the psychiatric evaluations begin. 2 independent experts are assigned. They meet with the woman on several occasions. They observe. They ask questions. They test perception of reality, memory function, impulse control. Their assessments are consistent. She suffers from severe mental illness. She has delusions. Her thought patterns are fragmented. She has periods where she loses contact with reality. But she is assessed to have understood her actions. She is assessed to have had control over her behavior. She is assessed to be criminally responsible. This is a decisive point in the investigation. It means that she can be charged. It means that she can be convicted. When the indictment is filed, the charges are among the most serious in French law. Murder of a minor, torture, barbaric violence, unlawful imprisonment, desecration of a corpse. The case proceeds to the Cour d'assises in Paris. What is now to be examined is not whether she did it. She has confessed. What is to be examined is how, and why, and in what state. The trial begins at the Cour d'assises in Paris. Security is high. The courtroom is full. Journalists, lawyers, spectators, relatives. On one side sits the prosecution, on the other the defense. At the front, under guard, sits the defendant. She moves constantly in her chair. Changes position, leans back, then forward. Looks around the room without fixing her gaze. When the judge speaks, she does not look up. When the interpreter translates, she sometimes interrupts and says that she already knows. That they can stop. That she cannot bear to hear. The prosecutor methodically goes through the timeline. The school. The walk home. The entrance. The camera footage. The apartment. The plastic container. The movement through the neighborhood. Each point is linked to technical evidence. Each claim is supported by images, times, testimonies. The defendant barely reacts. When her name is mentioned, she looks up, but only briefly. When the victim's name is spoken, she remains in the same position. No visible reaction. She begins to pick at her hands, at her nails, at her sleeve. When the investigators testify in court, they describe the conversations with her. How she answered without coherence. How she deflected questions. How she began to talk about herself, her needs, her problems. How she changed the subject when pressured. The psychiatrists are called. They present their assessments. The delusions. The fragmented thought patterns. The periods of detachment from reality. They describe a person with severe mental illness, but also a person who understood what she was doing, who could account for her actions, who could adapt her behavior. The defense tries to highlight her illness, tries to show that she did not have control, tries to have the court see her as not criminally responsible. The prosecutor presses the opposite. On the planning, on the movements, on the decisions, on the actions before and after, on the fact that she tried to conceal, on the fact that she moved through the city, on the fact that she acted. The judges listen, take notes, ask questions. During the proceedings, the defendant sometimes says things outright, without context, about how she has been treated, about how she feels, about being tired, about wanting to eat. Sometimes she laughs briefly, without connection to what has been said. Sometimes she becomes silent for a long time. It is not outbursts. It is not drama. It is absence. When the prosecutor concludes his presentation, it is in a low voice, with measured words, with phrasing that does not circle around. He speaks of a child who walked home from school, of a building that was supposed to be safe, of an adult who exploited that. The defense responds with the illness, with the background, with the previous care, with the breakdowns, with the chaos. The court adjourns. Everyone leaves the courtroom. The defendant remains seated for a moment, moves in the chair, looks around as if she does not quite understand that it is a break. The defendant's name is Dabia Benkired. She is 24 years old when she stands trial. She was born in Algeria and came to France as a child together with her family. Her upbringing has been marked by repeated moves, temporary housing, and a lack of stability, both socially and practically. She has for long periods lived with relatives, sometimes with acquaintances, sometimes without a fixed address, and she has never had a longer continuous employment or an established means of support. At the time of the crime, she is not registered at the address where Lola lives, but she has access to the building through her sister, who is a resident in the house. It is through that connection that she moves through the building without attracting attention. without being stopped by the entrance or neighbors. She is not part of the residence, daily life, but she is also not a completely unknown figure in the environment. In the years leading up to the murder, there are recurring contacts with healthcare documented. She has sought help for psychological problems on several occasions, been hospitalized, discharged, missed follow-up appointments, and then returned. Medical records describe periods of delusions, confusion, and fragmented thinking, with difficulty maintaining coherent reasoning and orienting herself in conversation. There are notes of aggressive behavior toward healthcare staff, and occasions where she was perceived as threatening, which in some cases led to decisions of involuntary psychiatric care. On one occasion several years before the murder, she is arrested after behaving violently at a healthcare facility and is then assessed to be in a psychotic state. She is admitted for treatment, treated, and later discharged. After that, the pattern of instability continues, with periods of contact with healthcare, followed by interruptions, disappearances, and returns. No long-term continuity of treatment is ever established. There are no previous convictions for serious violent crimes, no known reports of abuse against children, and no documented connections to the victim or her family prior to the day in question. She does not appear in police records as a person with a violent past, and there is nothing to indicate that she had any relationship with Lola before she appears in the building on October 14th. Her life situation at the time of the crime is described in the investigation as irregular and fragmented. She lacks a permanent residence, moves between different addresses, stays periodically with relatives, periodically with acquaintances, and sometimes in temporary accommodations. She has no fixed routines, no clear anchors in everyday life, and no stable social structure. Her means of support are unclear, and she gives contradictory information about how she manages financially. In the interrogations after the arrest, the same pattern emerges. She has difficulty giving a coherent account of her movements, mixes timelines, shifts between subjects, and often answers questions that were not asked. When pressed on details, the information changes, and when asked to explain contradictions, she shifts focus to her own experiences and her own state of being. Her relationship with her sister is described differently from time to time, sometimes as close, sometimes as conflict-filled, sometimes as non-existent. The psychiatric evaluations show a person with long-standing mental illness, marked by delusions, persecutory thoughts, and periods of detachment from reality. She describes experiences of being threatened, observed, and followed, situations that cannot be confirmed by anyone else. At the same time, the investigations show that she has the ability to orient herself in environments, plan her movements, travel through the city, use public transport, and make practical decisions in everyday life. It is precisely this combination that recurs in all assessments: a fragmented inner life but an outward functional ability. Mental illness but at the same time the ability to act purposefully. Confusion in thought but structure in action. In the courtroom, this becomes clear. She can follow the proceedings for long periods and then suddenly lose focus, begin to move restlessly, or interrupt without context. She can answer clearly to one question and in the next moment speak incoherently. She often returns to her own state, her own needs, and her own situation, while references to the victim are few and brief. It is this person the court now has before it. An individual with documented severe mental illness, a life marked by instability and lack of context, but also with a preserved ability to plan, move, and carry out actions. It is in this tension that the court must now make its decision. When Dabiet Ben-Kirit is given the floor in the courtroom, it is rarely that the answers follow the questions. She speaks at length, but without clear direction, shifts between subjects, and constantly returns to her own condition. Sometimes she begins to answer what has been said, only to interrupt herself and change track mid-sentence. There are moments when she sounds clear and coherent, only to become incoherent and difficult to follow in the next moment. When the prosecutor asks her to describe what happened that afternoon, she first gives fragments of a timeline, but soon loses the thread and begins talking about how she felt, how she was afraid, how she perceived herself as threatened. She mentions people who are not in the investigation, situations that cannot be substantiated, events that cannot be placed in time. When confronted with contradictions, she says that she does not remember, that everything is blurry, that she cannot explain. The judge tries to steer the conversation back to concrete events, but the answers slip away. Sometimes she responds with a counter-question. Sometimes with a comment about the court, about the interpreter, about how she is being treated. Sometimes she becomes silent for a long time, looks down at the table, picks at her hands, before beginning to speak again about something completely different. When her own statements from the interrogations are read out, she reacts weakly. She shakes her head, smiles briefly, says that she did not mean it that way, that she was tired, that she did not understand. When the prosecutor reminds her that she confessed, she says that she does not remember saying that she was confused, that she was afraid. She gives no coherent explanations for how the confession came about. On several occasions during the proceedings, she returns to her body. She says that she is in pain, that she feels nauseous, that she is hungry, that she needs water, that she cannot sit. She asks for breaks. She complains about the chair, about the light, about the sounds in the courtroom. When the judge gives her the floor again, she often continues where she left off, but without connection to the question. When the psychiatrists present their assessments, she reacts with clear resistance. She says that they are wrong, that they do not understand her, that they are lying, that they want to harm her. She interrupts, shakes her head, laughs briefly, without anything in the situation justifying it. When the judge asks her to let the experts finish, she remains seated, but moves restlessly, shifts position, looks away. The defense tries to get her to describe her experiences of threat, of persecution, of fear, but the answers become incoherent. She speaks of people watching her, of voices, of the feeling of being in danger, but without being able to give concrete examples. When pressed on details, she deflects and returns to her own state. Throughout the proceedings, the same pattern recurs. A focus on the self, on the body, on feelings, on the situation here and now, while what concerns the victim remains peripheral. She mentions Lola rarely. When the name is mentioned, she does not react noticeably. There is no visible change in facial expression, no pause, no emotional marking. She continues where she was. For those present in the courtroom, it becomes clear that this is not a game, not a role, not a conscious strategy. It is a way of being, a way of functioning, a way of existing in the room. She is there, but at the same time not really present. She participates, but without sharing the common understanding of what the trial is about. It is against this background that the court must now take a position. With her words, with her behavior, with her illness, with the actions that are on the table. When the court reconvenes to deliver the verdict, the courtroom is silent. Most seats are occupied. Journalists sit at the back with notebooks in their laps. Relatives sit gathered. The defendant is brought in under guard and sits down in her place without looking around. The judge reads out the decision calmly, without raised voices, without emphasis. The court finds that Dabiet Benkired is guilty of the murder of a minor with torture and barbaric violence, of unlawful imprisonment, and of desecration of a corpse. The wording is precise, legal, without embellishment. There is no doubt in the reasoning. The evidence is assessed as overwhelming. The court goes through the decisive points: the camera footage, the movement pattern, the apartment, the forensic examination, the confession, the technical findings. There is, according to the court, no room for alternative explanations. The psychiatric question is then addressed. The court accounts for the two independent expert reports, for the conclusion that the defendant suffers from severe mental illness, but that, at the time of the offense, she had sufficient grounding in reality and control to be held criminally responsible. It is this point that makes her sentenced to prison and not to psychiatric care. The judge states that the acts were of exceptional brutality, that the victim was particularly defenseless, and that the crime was committed in an environment that should have been safe. The sentencing value is assessed as maximum. Dabiet Benkired is sentenced to life imprisonment. When the words are spoken, there is no clear reaction. She remains seated in the same position, looks down at the table, moves her hands slowly, There is no visible emotion, no outward reaction, no protest. She says nothing. The defense notes the verdict. The prosecutor remains seated. In the courtroom, only the movement of chairs, muted breaths, low voices are heard. The court adjourns. The defendant is led out through a side door. After the verdict, Dabia Benkired is transferred to a high-security facility. She is placed within the French prison system with special psychiatric supervision, in accordance with the court's assessment of her condition. No information about the exact facility is made public for security reasons. The verdict is not successfully appealed and remains in force. The investigation into the sister, who is registered at the property on Rue Menin in the 19th arrondissement, is closed without charges. She is heard as a witness. Nothing in the preliminary investigation supports prior knowledge of the crime or participation in the act. The prosecutor assesses that her connection to the case is limited to kinship and address. Later, information emerges that Lola's father died of a heart attack. It is speculated that the stress and grief in connection with his daughter's death may have been a contributing factor. Lola Daviet was 12 years old, a random victim who never got the chance to become an adult.